Hey guys, um, I haven't done one of these in a while, I know, but after watching the LCS finals today, I found a need to just at least share some of my ideas on how to run Ornn comps, more specifically how a lot of the LCK teams in the past have run these type of comps that are front to back in nature and then are playing for scaling team fights. And typically right now with such huge popularity of Ornn comps, I'm just going to call it Ornn comps from here on out. But assume that these type of compositions and this that type of deployment is very typical in a scaling T fight type of scenario. So Ornn could be Scion, it could be like a scaling top laner like Gwen, so on and so forth. But the list continues. But for the sake of an example, I'll just be using this as a sample. So there are a couple of requirements for Ornn. Like these are the ones that you pretty much should have. Like it's fun. It's not the end of the world if you don't have these, but you are naturally at a disadvantage. So the first one is good front to back champions. So we're gonna look at Genji's draft for game one versus T1 in the finals for this, and then just go down the checklist. What are really good front to back champions? High damage potential, and also one who takes advantage of the space that are being provided by the likes of the front line. What are champions like that? Victor. Champions like Ezreal use that very well. So they have two frontline members that are going to be really good at just getting aggro and also for creating that small space that the carries need. And then the second one is jungler that excels with low EXP and resources. You're typically not going to find champions that require a lot of resources, mainly because you're going to be seeing yourself skip a lot of jungle camps in order to facilitate these lanes. Typically, on the top side of the map, you're going to get very little support, if any, from the Ornn player, since a lot of the current champions in the meta beat Ornn in the earlier stages of the game. So with half of the map being limited, then your pathing becomes extremely limited. So in that ways, you may lose a camp, you may lose two camps, and then if your jungler is heavily affected by it because of the EXP deficit, and most likely that's not the champion to pick when Ornn comes. As a result, Volibear is also really good because Volibear is extremely effective at starting at level 3. Sure, like his level 6 spike is pretty huge, but his level 5 and then on are pretty good. Like he has a relatively high early curve, and that's exactly what Orncom appreciates. Third is carries with good wave clear. You want at least one because of an explanation that I'm going to go a little bit more in depth later. But when you have a champion that could basically one shot an entire stacked wave, then the formula becomes much easier to execute. And here's some of the nice things to have are like secondary backup engage is always useful along with the Ornn. So you don't always have to start with the Ornalty, but it's not necessarily required. Another one is if you have a neutral or a stronger bot. Naturally, you're going to lose on the top side of the map with Ornn for the most part when you blind it. So if you have a neutral or a stronger bot on the bot side, then at least the jungler could find some relief and protect his camps on that side at the very least. And so he won't be too behind in terms of EXP. And for both of these, they don't particularly have secondary backup engage. I don't consider Volibear to be one, just because of the way to look at you. Look at T1's comp, you're going to be like, how the hell is Volibear supposed to be secondary engage? But what they do have is a stronger bot lane. Ezreal Karma, when played properly, especially in the hands of somebody as skilled as Ruler, it has what it takes to beat the Caitlyn Lux lane. So, in a lot of ways, Genji's comp is ideal for an ideal Ornn comp. With this missing. If this was like a Leona or something, then that'll be fine. But at the same time, if it was a Leona, then the second requirement won't be met. And in my opinion, this one's more important for your stable early game. So let's just assume that this is a typical, like really safe Ornn comp. What is gonna happen a lot in the earlier stages, especially when not earlier stages, my bad. In the mid game stages, is that especially against a comp like this, where T1 is going to be actively trying to, especially when the dragon is the main objective, for Faker to make this wave neutral, and then for him to group up as 4, push, and then lean towards the Camille so he could get the one additional wave. All of them reset, and then they all group up as 5 and then go down and then enter the river. That is a typical T1 and also LCK's way of playing through mid, and mainly because of the two reasons. One is that when the dragon is coming up in a minute or 2 minutes, very few people pay attention to this wave. So, but at the same time, like Ornn comps are something that as a composition that hates to lose a lot of exp, hates to lose a lot of farm, mainly because Victor's very farm reliant and Ornn's also farm and exp reliant. Remember, the break-off point for Ornn oftentimes is level 13. So with that in mind, then there's the conundrum that you run into is oftentimes Ornn comps will match the 131. And what will eventually happen if that is the case is that Victor gets shoved in, and then Rise joins them in mid. Then, because of the numbers of disadvantage, since Victor is already clearing the mid, they also lose mid prio. And then when they lose mid prio, all they need to do is just go to the top side jungle, clear it, and then maybe even invade into the enemy blue buff to completely cut off the mid lane from the Ornn. And then Camille gets to just shove in the wave for free. And then after the wave has been fully crushed and the Ornn has to be pinned underneath the tower, then all of them reset or go back to mid and regain the control. And then now we find ourselves in a situation where Ornn is perma stuck on the other side of the map. The objective is ideally in. So this is something that is very common when you are trying to match 1-3-1 deployment, which is a very huge mistake when it comes to Ornn comps. So how did Korea figure out a way to stop this? The beginning deployment is the way that it is typically stopped. One qualifier is that these type of deployments really require one thing, and it is that this 4 needs to reset on the right time and also needs to be on the wave to either fight it at the exact same time or earlier. That is really important because of this wave that we're going to see. One thing to keep in mind is that there's a couple of towers that Ornn comps wouldn't mind losing. The ones that they wouldn't mind losing is this one, and then this one. Even mid-tier 2 is allowed. But these ones are very difficult once you lose them because of this strategy. So let's say that they're earlier even. With Victor and then them having a numbers advantage like this, then they naturally have to back off. And then when they get the numbers advantage, what would typically happen is that since they're entering the lane and then his wave is naturally later because of the LCK setup, then all Gen.G is just going to be running into this side and then clearing this vision. And then potentially cutting off SKT, like T1 members from entering and then helping the Camille as well. And then with this complete fog of board, then Ornn is able to push this wave, push another, and then either make the wave neutral or positive, and then link together with the 5, and then they catch mid again. And then with the 5, there's a lot of situations that could happen. Camille's going to be pinned here, so if they try to aggressively contest the wave, then they get Ornn ulted, and there's a high chance that they die. It happens sometimes. But smarter teams won't typically do that because they have a numbers disadvantage. So what will happen again? They will lose prio again. And depending on what the Rise does, in this case, it doesn't really matter. Even if he pushes the wave and then joins the team, then there's 5 people versus the 4. Then, and at the same time, even if this wave is lost and then he's able to push the wave all the way in, then there's a high chance that the wave is hung here. So what does the Ornn comp do next after getting the prio? Then depending on the champion who needs it, after they get this, and then they just fade down. And then either the Victor or the Ornn picks up this wave, and then they keep doing this over and over again in seesaw pattern. And the entire goal is to maximize farm. They're not trying to create side lane pressure to the point that they have to answer or try to play an aggressive play. Remember, Ornn comps by nature are ones that are stronger when they are just doing nothing and then they're just waiting for their item spikes. So with this defensive type of play is very difficult to break, especially in terms of the typical way that League is played around the mid-centric. Of course, there are specific deployments, especially emphasis around the side lane, that are going to be countering this, but that is subject for another video. Now let's take a look at 2 occasions where Ornn comps have been played recently, and then identify the mistakes that each team had made based on the information that we have just discussed. So the entire premise of this T1 versus Gen.G game is that this is an Ornn comp, and again, this is something that we have to identify. Dorn should not really care about losing this tower. In fact, it is kind of good for him because this wave could get hung and he could catch a lot of it. And then also Baron is not spawning anytime soon, and then the Dragon is not due for another 3 minutes. So in this case, this is a perfect time for them to take a defensive stance and then make sure that none of their side laners can get caught. Now, in this situation, probably the one that is like the biggest threat of happening is the top wave, just because the T1 has more waves to play this, and as a result, they could stack a bigger wave. Again, this wave is not necessarily needed. After he clears this, then he could immediately leap because the wave is neutral. So they try to go for this one specific way, which is the first deviant from the system. Because if this is the actual proper Ornn 4-1 comp, then Ezreal should be running mid with Volibear. And in this situation, since they are early to the wave, and if there are four of them there, then Caitlyn naturally has to back away. Jungle's farming his camps, and then Lux is nowhere in sight. So if they get the push right here, then they could lean down to the Ornn. Ryze has to back away, and then Ornn gets to shove this wave, maybe even catch this one, and then join the mid lane. And then depending on the way that the Camille plays, then they could either catch this wave or even try to look for a fight if he decides to stay. And this is a type of situation that'll happen. But instead, what Ruler does is that they try to look for a flashpoint on Faker, which obviously fails. And then immediately, what ends up happening is that now Zeus realizes that nobody could potentially protect this without dropping immense pressure mid. One player from mid that is a 3-2 now has to deploy, and as a result, they're naturally forced into a 1-3-1. And this is when T1's identification comes in really clutch, because now since the 4-1 is broken and that one specific laner that is really vulnerable to dives is exposed like this, then Chovy has to play really careful, because now Ornn has to abandon the wave like this in order for to even to hope to grow up as 5. And then since the 1-3-1 has been already forced because the Ezreal's move, then something like this will happen. Even if he was underneath this tower, by the way, this would most likely happen just because of the way that the composition of T1 is ran. So this is the mistake that Gen G has made. And this is something that is very surprising, mainly because Gen G was a team, well, Samsung Galaxy was the team that mastered this strategy. Now, let's look at a far more egregious example that happened today. And going off the checklist again, there's immediately some problems with 100 Thieves composition that is not ideal of an Ornn comp. Now, do they have good front-to-back champions? Yes, they have Aphelios, they have Graves, they have Nautilus. Somewhat, right? LeBlanc front-to-back, not really, but it's serviceable. Jungler that excels with low EXP resources, no, right? Out of all the champions that you'll think of low resources, one of the last champions you'll think of is Graves. And they carries a good wave clear. Now, do they have good wave clear in that way? Graves may have good wave clear, but LeBlanc definitely does not. And Aphelios is very situational. If you have blue gun, then you do. If you don't, it's not that ideal. So when there's an Aphelios in the team, it's very typical for Orianna to be present, Syndra to be present, or Victor to be present. But neither of that is happening. So there are two X's in terms of the Ornn comp requirements. They do have secondary backup engage, and then they have neutral or stronger, but most likely neutral in this case. So with the checklist in mind, there are some slight deviants, but the play is nonetheless relevant. Again, it's one of those situations where the 1-3-1, it actually ends up biting them in the ass and leaves one champion vulnerable. Now, one of the things that are really big problematic about this game that 100 Thieves has to solve is the fact that Mordekaiser is a very difficult champion for Ornn to deal with as a whole by himself, and it's a very difficult champion to deal with two people. Now, this is the emphasis part, and this is the reason why 100 Thieves played this maneuver wrong. When they realize that the bot lane still has not reset, and you see Danny's mana, then you understand that either you are you're first to the wave, or you're going to be neutral. In this case, Aphelios is relatively same items as Xayah, so he's not particularly scared either. So one problem that immediately is a problem that is because the Graves is a high resource jungler is that Closer's not with the team, that could potentially be 3. It's not even 3, it's 2. So in that, and then another thing that we see a problem with is Abbedagga is trying to get bot prio when bot prio is not needed right now. They're the one that needs to get priority and pluses in order to split them up. They're the ones that, if it is neutral, Ornn comps are happy. So if he is here, and then also Graves is here, then Danny is forced to back away. Ryze is nowhere to support them, and then also they have just fought a fight, so a lot of their key ultimates are off cooldown. So then, what would happen in that case? Then what they would do is they'll just pop sweepers and then just clear out this entire side. And the thing is, Mordekaiser is really good at 2v1, but it becomes a whole different story if the entire team is just controlling that quadrant, and then Ornn is able to push the wave aggressively, make the wave positive, and then Ornn joins mid while the Mordekaiser is pushing the wave back, and then all of a sudden, Xayah with no ultimate at this brief window becomes a very scary time, because there could be a Ornn and Fog that is ready to just like ulti the moment that they try to contest this wave. And let's say that Jojo is decides to not go mid lane and then just goes to bot, clears the wave, and then pushes it in. Then that's another opportunity for them to get the mid push and then S5, and then LeBlanc could come down. Or if Jojo decides to stick with them in this situation, as 4 to mid lane, because they see them, it's already too late, because one, they are early to the wave, or if not even, and at that point, without the key ultimates, and they actually have a decent chance to push this wave. And if that is the case, then even if Jojo's mid, then they're still going to be able to have the same exact format, except that they're going to be now slower to this, so it'll be additionally worse. What ends up happening instead is that since the 1-3-1 is now technically 2-2-1, then after LeBlanc gets the push, then they all of a sudden gets disjointed, and then they decide to recall. This is the time where 5-man Ornn comps could ideally happen. This is one of the very rare occasions where LeBlanc getting plus and then Ornn getting neutral could be taken advantage of. And since they're coming in from both sides, if they try to contest this wave, then these guys are in a lot of trouble. Again, Danny has only flash. But they decide to reset, and all for Berserker's Greaves and Longsword. Now, this is a big problem now, because what's going to end up happening is that Ornn is not going to get a time like this again. He struggles a lot against Mordekaiser, so they're going to require a lot of investments. Not to make the matters worse, now they're late. And as a result, since EG has the first mid move, then they could never help the Ornn get out of this trap. So what ends up happening is that since Ornn is not able to look for this time and is permanently stuck on the top side of the map, his utility is not taken advantage of. So what does EG do? Since their champions are already really strong and then they're also really fit at fighting, then they're not afraid of the whatever team that is on the blue side of the map. So they go for the fight anyway, and then they win. And this is one of the examples where a team that is supposed to group up has missed an opportunity, and as a result, they're getting punished. The video is getting rather long, so I probably have to stop here. But this is the main formats of an Ornn comp that are typically well established in the tactics part. And hopefully there are more performances from teams in MSI to exemplify this play, because when done right, this comp is very difficult to beat.